this one is, this has been on my mind a lot. A lot of people were complaining that I neglected their methodology and thesis of choice. So look, systematic review, the burning questions. And there's myself, okay? So this video, I'm going to talk through some tips for the systematic review. I'm going to go through some common mistakes people make. I'm even going to show you an example of a systematic review, just to keep the naysayers off my back, okay? I know a lot of you have passed out from confusion and, you know, anticipation for this video. So I won't keep us any longer. Let's go. Now, most of your questions about the systematic review revolve around the research question, particularly refining the limits of your research question in the context of conducting a systematic review, okay? So this requires careful consideration of exclusion, inclusion criteria, search strategy, and synthesis methods, okay? Now, I've been very creative with where I put my little circle with my face in it, so don't get too distracted by that creativity. So look, some tips here, okay? So first of all, okay, so we're talking about defining the research question, okay? So look, clearly articulate let me get my old pointer here, okay? Clearly articulate the research question or objective of your systematic review. Ensure that it is specific, focused, and answerable through a comprehensive review of existing literature. Now, this is where your old PICO framework comes in. So PICO, population, intervention, comparison, outcome. So don't worry about these terms too much if you're only starting off. I'm gonna come to an example later on. So you basically use the PICO framework to structure your research question by defining the population, intervention or exposure, comparison, and outcomes of interest. So this helps narrow down the scope of review and guide the selection of your studies, okay? Now, so I mentioned the inclusion and exclusion criteria. You're going to hear that word or those terms a lot from your supervisor, but it boils down to how not to have too many studies in your review. So obviously you can't have a review of everything. So how you establish that is you use certain criteria, and they're going to be based on your research question and the objectives. So consider factors such as the design, qualitative, quantitative, mixed, what type of studies you want to look at, participant characteristics. Do you want them to be a particular gender or race, or one that comes from a particular socio-economic background or particular working background, publication status, all that sort of stuff. And then just to follow on from the types of studies, do you want them to be randomized control trials, cohort studies, case control studies, qualitative studies? So you're going to specify any restrictions on study design to ensure the relevance and quality of the evidence. Okay. Now I've hidden myself in among the books there. Publication bias is another thing you have to consider as well. So consider strategies to minimize publication bias by including both published and unpublished studies, as well as grey literature, and that's a very important one. So conference, abstracts, dissertations, government reports, that's all classified as grey literature. And then your search strategy, of course, you develop a comprehensive search strategy to identify relevant studies across multiple databases. And you probably heard of some of these: PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science. So you use a combination of keywords then, mesh terms, and Boolean operators and/or to maximize the sensitivity and specificity of your search. Okay, so that's basically just thought, and I'll show you an example of this later on, but this is basically saying that when you're, like, let's use it like Google for an example. So when you're going to look for something on Google, you want to be a bit more specific. So you're only going to look for, you're going to leave out certain terms. You're not going to go like best place to go on holiday, because that's just going to give you too much. So you might say best place to go on holiday in winter, best place to go skiing on holiday in winter, and then you might refine it further by saying cheapest place, or best place for children and families to go on holiday in winter and skiing. You get the point. You're just basically, you're narrowing it down each time. Now here's some more tips, okay? So language and date restrictions. So decide whether to include studies published in languages other than English and whether to impose any data restrictions on the search. So most people, I think, will just be looking for English studies. And of course that leaves out a huge chunk of the world. But I suppose the whole point of research is that eventually if something is of relevance, it'll rise to the top anyway. So I don't think you'd be sort of not initially anyway, missing anything too important if you don't put in, let's say, studies in German or Spanish or French, or even sort of like Asian languages. I think sort of people worry sometimes that, well, we're going to miss out on important data by not including them. But if your language of choice, or sorry, if your first language isn't those languages, it's going to be pretty tough for you. Now we do have obviously AI, Google Translate and stuff like that, and that's very good. And of course I would encourage people to add a little bit of spice to their thesis, to go and Google Translate some of those studies to put in there, or even check out reviews, English reviews of those books by someone who can speak those languages and can understand them, because Google Translate doesn't always interpret everything important from it. But I'd say as a student starting off, it's going to be expected of you that English studies will be perfectly sufficient for now. So data extraction. So you have to define the data extraction process by specifying the variables and outcomes of interest to be extracted from each included study. So develop standardized forms or templates for data extraction to ensure consistency and accuracy. Don't worry about that, I'll show you that in a little while. And then in terms of quality assessment, you're going to determine the criteria and tools for assessing the quality and risk of bias of included studies. This is where you have your Cochrane risk of bias tool for randomized trials, your Newcastle Ottawa scale for observational studies, just for example there. And consider how study quality will influence the interpretation of your findings. Okay, here's some more. Okay, so synthesis methods. Decide on the synthesis method for analyzing and summarizing the findings of included studies, and this is going to be your evidence table. I'm going to show you this in a little while. Okay, so common synthesis methods include narrative synthesis, meta-analysis, thematic analysis for qualitative studies, qualitative comparative analysis for mixed method studies. And then this is just a follow on from that. So consider whether subgroup analyses or sensitivity analyses will be conducted to explore or assess the robustness of findings across different study characteristics or methodological quality. And then the final one there is reporting guidelines. Adhere to established reporting guidelines for systematic reviews relevant to your field. So PRISMA, and ensure transparency and reduce reproducibility in reporting your review methods and findings. Okay. Okay, look, next one, utilize a good search strategy. So developing and utilizing a search strategy in your thesis can help refine and limit your research question by identifying relevant literature and providing a comprehensive understanding of existing knowledge in the field. And here's how you can use a search strategy to refine and limit your research question. Okay, so we're going to look at it in a little bit more detail here. So define your research question. So start by clearly defining your research question or objective. This will guide the development of your search strategy and help ensure that you focus on relevant literature that directly addresses your research topic. Identify key concepts and keywords. So break down your research question to key concepts or terms. Identify relevant keywords, synonyms, and related terms associated with each concept. Consider using subject headings, mesh terms, if searching in databases that support them. So that basically just means when you're searching for something, someone might use a particular term. They might use an alternative version of the term. And it's just important to remember that when you're going to search for something, that the term you're looking for might be embedded in a text somewhere, or might be only mentioned once or twice, but the whole article could be about it because you might be talking about it generally. And here we go, look, create a search string. Combine your identified keywords and synonyms into a search string using Boolean operators. This is the and or not to connect related terms. Be mindful of truncation and wildcard symbols to capture variations of search terms. So that's what I was talking about there. Just be mindful that someone might use a different term for it. So let's say you were researching something on well-being. But let's say they don't use the term well-being, because it might have been sort of well-being and wellness have a sort of they're sort of buzzwords these days, but they might have been catch-all terms for something else, or may not have been used, but the article could still have been talking about well-being and wellness. They just may not have used that term, so just be mindful of that. So just make sure you select the appropriate database. So determine which databases are most relevant to your research topic and scope of your study. So common databases, as I mentioned before, PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus, PsycInfo, Google Scholar. Refine your search filters. So utilize database specific filters and advanced search options to refine your search results. Filters may include publication date, study type, language. I'm going to go into all these when I show the evidence table. Also, just remember, like when you look at other systematic review theses, just look at what they're doing and how they've refined down the terms, because that's usually a better map for you to use when you're going forward, because there's someone who's already done it, and you're going to be basically following that template. So, you know, if in doubt and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I start off? Just start off using their terms, and then you'll get a sort of an understanding of how the system works, how the filtering works, how the database searches work. And then once you're a bit more comfortable, then you can start branching out and using different terms. And look, it's basically saying what I'm saying already. So the database thesaurus. So when I was saying earlier on about wellness and well-being, that's a good example. So explore the database thesaurus or subject index to identify additional relevant keywords or subject headings related to your research topic. Now, the grey literature I mentioned earlier on, so it just means conference proceedings, thesis, dissertations, government reports, and non-profit organization websites. So there's a wealth of information out there, and a lot of them you would hope have some sort of like, you know, they sort of, what's the term I'm looking for? They sort of cross-pollinate, I suppose, is the best term I can think of for now. They're all sort of interconnected, and you would hope they would. You would hope that something on the website would link back to a thesis, or a thesis would mention a report, and you know, you would hope that nothing is sort of out there that's really important that no one's ever heard of or that exists in isolation. Most of the grey literature and other literature should double back on one another. So conduct iterative searching by reviewing the initial search results. So this is what I was talking about, like searching articles, people's thesis, seeing what they're doing, and then looking to see, okay, how can I expand on that? Can I combine two bibliographies to see if I can move forward with searching other references and citations. Document your search strategy in detail, including the database search terms used, data search, and any search filters applied. This ensures transparency and reproducibility in your research process. Okay. Now I'm covering that thing there, but that's okay. This is basically saying what I've said already, which is basically evaluate the relevance and quality based on predetermined inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, so screen titles and abstracts to identify potentially relevant articles and review full text articles for eligibility. So these will have keywords at the beginning, just after the abstract. They'll also use the terms throughout the article. So just make sure you mind them for information and just keep a record of them. Maybe in an Excel sheet, just have common key terms that seem to throw back relevant literature. Now, so we have here tools and frameworks. So what is this? So this is just as several tools and frameworks available to help you throughout the systematic research process. I'm going to go through a few of them here, okay? So let's have a look. So here's the first one, okay? So Cochrane collaboration, that's one of them, okay? So Cochrane is a global independent network of researchers, professional patients, and people interested in health. So Cochrane reviews are systematic reviews of primary research in healthcare and health policy, okay? So they provide detailed guidance on conducting systematic reviews in healthcare. So whenever you're wondering what the hell a Cochrane is, there you go, okay? PRISMA is another one, preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So it's an evidence-based minimum set of items for reporting systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And people use it to ensure transparent reporting and improve quality of systematic reviews. Another one is the JBI, so the Joanna Briggs. So this software for, again, systematic review of literature assists researchers in the entire systematic review process from protocol development to publication. Don't worry about some of these terms you're thinking I'm going too fast or I'm not giving too much detail. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later. Distiller SR. It's a web-based systematic review software that supports collaboration and automates various stages of the review process, and assists with study selection, data extraction, and risk of bias assessment. Here's a few more tools. Okay, so there's GRADE. It's a framework for rating the quality of evidence and the strength of recommendations in healthcare. So I'm going to mention some of these tools and frameworks here. You'll get a little bit of a gist here, but you can go off and do your own research then on them when you're going to do a systematic review. But don't be worried too much about it for the moment. Mendeley and Sotero, that's obviously for reference and management tools, and it's useful for organizing and managing references, creating bibliographies, and collaborating with other researchers. Now, so look, we've come back to the point I made earlier on, which is basically creating an evidence table. So you're going to use all your information you have so far, and you're going to create an evidence table that's going to look at all the studies used, what the population is like, what the methods are like, and so forth. Okay, so look, it's a crucial component of a systematic review, and it summarizes key information from included studies, providing a structured overview of the evidence. And I'm going to give you a very clear example here. So look, this is an example. So we just have some studies here, and then in the next column you have the study design. So qualitative randomized control trial, participants 500, 1200 adults. It gives, like, you know, children aged 5 to 10, adults with hypertension, adults with chronic pain. So a little bit of detail there. The intervention and exposure, so drugs versus placebo, diet versus, you know, diet X versus diet Y. Comparison column, outcome measured, BMI change over 12 months, patient reported experiences with pain management, blood pressure reduction, and then you mentioned the results here, and then the quality of them. So they were going back to the grade thing again, okay? So low, qualitative study, small sample size. Moderate, prospective cohort design. High, RCT design, large sample size. Okay, so that's the sort of stuff you'd expect to see there in an evidence table. I'm going to give you another example here now, with an explanation of the columns. Okay, so it's still the same example, but here's an explanation of the columns. So the study ID is a unique identifier for each included study. So that's that one. Study design, it describes the research design such as RCT, cohort, qualitative participants. Again, fairly simple. The number and any sort of relevant demographics. So as you can see here, demographics, adults, hypertension is a bit of a detail there. Intervention exposure column. Now some of these columns will change slightly. They might have different wording, but the contents of them will always be the same. Comparison control describes the comparison group or control conditions. Outcome measures, list the main outcome measures, systems. So yeah, fairly straightforward there, okay? Now here's a more explicit example. So let's go through a simplified example of a systematic review. Imagine we are conducting a systematic review to summarize existing evidence on the effects of cognitive CBT, easier to say, for reducing symptoms of anxiety in adults. Okay, so let's say that's our research title, and someone has asked us to do a systematic review on that. Okay, so I'm going to guide you through the different steps on how to do that. Okay, so here, look, steps 1 to 2. Okay, so define the research question. So we know what we're supposed to look for, so let's turn it into a question. What is the effectiveness of CBT in reducing symptoms of anxiety in adults? Okay, so once we have that, now we can develop the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So very basically, it should have studies involving adults, because adults is mentioned in the research, so 18 years or older. So interventions, they have to be CBT, so they can't be any type of therapy, because we're looking specifically at CBT. Outcomes must include measure of anxiety symptoms, because that's what we are looking to reduce. And of course, we want to publish in English, because that is our primary language, and that is the best place to start. Peer-reviewed articles obviously is a given. You don't want to grab information from spurious websites, spurious YouTube videos, or sort of out of date or unsubstantiated articles or even books. I mean, books might have been produced or published a couple of decades ago. They may have went under the radar, might be out of date. So best to always be mindful that it's been peer reviewed. So then we do step 3, which is the literature search and study selection. So this is when we conduct the actual systematic literature search. We use relevant databases, so PubMed, PsycInfo, and then we're going to look at our inclusion criteria. So we're basically going to use key terms like, let's say, anxiety, CBT, anxiety reduction, and then you're going to eliminate studies that maybe involve children, teenagers, or studies that look at a different type of therapy. So once you have all your actual studies, then you're going to screen the titles, and the abstract is very important there. But you may need to go a little bit further than the abstract. You might have to do a little bit more digging just to make sure that what you've gathered is actually relevant. Because it's best to find out now that the studies you have are actually useful than later. So look, let's say we find 5 relevant studies that meet our criteria. So we're going to pop them in here, okay? So we're going to extract the relevant information. I'm covering a little bit there, but don't worry about that. So we have our 5 studies here. We have the number of participants. You'll get this in the abstract. You basically there's some numbers of people in each of those studies that participate in the study. And here's what the intervention was like: individual, group, online, CBT with medication augmentation, CBT self-help workbook. Here's all the outcome measures, and here's the results. So look, significant reduction in anxiety scores post-intervention. You may need to write a little bit more in here if the results are a bit more robust or they require a little bit information. I wouldn't just put like success, like you need to put a little bit more thought into it. But this is sort of a good indicator of what to do starting off. And then we have steps 5 to 6. So assess the quality of each included study. So now we have steps 5 to 6, and that's where you're going to assess the quality of each included study using a standardized tool. So Cochrane risk of bias tool, and then you're going to consider factors such as randomization, blinding, and other sources of bias. This is where you're going in deep on the study and trying to figure out, are they actually useful, are they relevant, what are the limitations of them. Then your synthesis of results is you conducting a narrative synthesis of the findings, summarizing the results of each study, and discussing patterns, differences, or similarities across the studies. And then we have steps 7 to 8 then. So assessing the confidence in the evidence. So considering the overall quality of evidence using the grading system, the grade, based on study design, risk of bias, consistency of results, and other factors. And then you're going to be presenting the results, okay? So presenting the findings in a systematic review manuscript, your thesis, or even an article you're publishing, including a structured narrative, table summarizing study characters, so the evidence table I just showed you, and a summary of the overall evidence on the effectiveness of CBT for reducing anxiety symptoms in adults, okay? So there's a few basic steps, like 8 steps. When in doubt, when you're trying to figure out, okay, I can see this sort of the main stepping stones I have to use, but what's it look like? I would say we'll just grab a systematic review from the library, or search online, type in systematic review thesis PDF, and you'll see these steps more or less followed. And the writing up of the systematic review, once you have all this evidence gathered, you're basically, as it says, like you're just creating a narrative. And I'll give you a good example, not on this video, but I have another video coming on that. But I think this is enough for the moment. It's important not to overload someone with too much information. But if you are looking to see what a completed one of these looks like, as I said, like, you know, if you just like type in systematic review, master's thesis, PDF Ireland, you know, you'll get a great example there which you can use. So there's our video on systematic review, fairly straightforward. I know when people do look at the systematic review, they just think, well, it's just a monumental disaster, you know, or there's no way, it's too complicated. Once you figure out that there's like a few easy steps to follow, it's not too bad. And I would say again, the best thing to do whenever in doubt about anything I'm saying or anything your supervisor is saying, is look at the examples, look at other systematic review theses out there. And once you see what it looks like, it's very hard then to sort of say to yourself, well, I don't really know what I'm doing. Because if you have a good example and you kind of say to yourself, well, I don't know what to do next, just look what other people have done next. And you will need to get like 5 or 6 of them to get a broad overview. But that should be plenty to let you go ahead and plow ahead with your review without worrying too much about, well, where am I supposed to be going, or what, am I going in the right direction? Your research question, as I said in the first few slides, once you get that perfect, and once you know what studies you're looking for and what ones you're not looking for, then that'll keep you on the straight and narrow. And then it's just a case of gathering all the studies you need, breaking them down, synthesizing them. And then obviously the most important part, and sometimes the hardest part, is to create a narrative out of that. And the narrative is the thesis. And as I said many times, grab a thesis from the library on a systematic review and just look at the structure, look at the format, and look what they're doing. And if you stick to that, you'll do fine.